Good morning, everyone. My name is Tara McDuffie, and I'm the Executive Director for the Division of Global Affairs here at Kennesaw State University. And I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for today's panel discussion. Through these sessions, our goal is to provide opportunities for you to connect with global ambassadors to the United States and have engaging discussions on topics that are of interest to you. The content may be connected to your profession or you may simply want to increase your knowledge on today's discussion. Either way, we appreciate you being here with us. I hope that you find the session informative. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Joshua Azriel, Professor of Journalism and Emerging Media and Associate Director of KSU Graduate Studies and Development. Dr. Azriel will serve as our moderator and will have the pleasure of introducing our panelists.
Thank you, Tara. It is my privilege to introduce our guest speaker for today's Consular Connections program. Javier Diaz de Leon is the Mexican Consul General here in Metro Atlanta. He has run the Consul General's office since May 2016. He holds degrees in international relations and international conflict analysis from Universidad Iberoamericana and Kent University in the UK. In 1991, Consul Diaz joined the Mexican Foreign Service. He has worked in Mexican consulates in San Diego and New York City. In April 2017, he was promoted to the rank of ambassador. At the Atlanta Consul General's office, Mr. Diaz assists Mexican citizens with their renewal of passports, visas, and with educational opportunities in the Southeast United States. His office also promotes Mexico as a tourism destination for Americans. Today, Consul General Diaz is speaking with us about the U.S.-Mexican trade. After his presentation, KSU economics professor, Dr. Paul Liu, will join us for a conversation with the ambassador. Consul Diaz, welcome. Please go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you very much, first of all, and thank you all at Kennesaw and Mr. Azriel for this very generous introduction. So like it was very well said, my idea is to start by making a presentation about the economic relationship between our country and, of course, the United States and Georgia specifically, and then go from there to the more specific. I don't know if the presentation is it's already there. It's being put in there. So if you can go to the next slide, maybe that's where we start actually. Thank you. Okay, so as you can see there, of course, as probably most of you know, Mexico is one of the largest countries and in terms of partnership with the United States. It is actually one of the largest countries in the world in several ways. It is the 10th most populated country in the world. It is no country in the world has more Spanish-speaking people than Mexico. It's the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world in terms of population. It's a very young country. Median age is around a little over 28 years old, and which is, as you can see there, significantly lower than the United States. The Mexican economy is very large, and it has grown sustainably for the past couple of decades. And it grew 5% last year, even despite the context of the pandemic. Mexico's economy is one of the most open in the world. We have free trade agreements. Mexico has free trade agreements with 48 countries in the world through 13 agreements. Of course, a lot of these agreements also have to do with investment protection. Everybody knows about our free trade agreement with North America. Now it's called the USMCA with the United States and Canada. But sometimes not a lot of people know that also Mexico has free trade agreements with the European Union, with Japan, with some of the largest economies in the world. Mexico is one of the largest recipients of foreign direct investment in the world. And we have a very large connection with the United States economy-wise. It also, most of that economic relationship goes through our border, which is, as it's on the slide, a 2,000-mile border with the United States, with 55 active land ports of entry. It's one of the most dynamic and active border crossings in the world. And that is heavily involved in the complexity and the size, the tremendous size of our economic relationship. The next one, please. This is some of the figures about the U.S.-Mexico trade during the past 5 years. As you can see there, the numbers are enormous. They're very big. They're steadily, there's a steady growth or stability about them. In last year, the U.S. imports from Mexico were a little over $380 billion, and the Mexican imports from the United States were around $276 billion. That means that our total trade, if you add those two numbers in 2021, our total trade is over $600 billion, which is one of the largest trade relationships, not only, of course, between in the American hemisphere, but in the world. The next one, please. So Mexico is the second U.S. trade partner in the world, like I was saying, in terms of our total trade. This is for 2021. Canada is a little over by about $3 million, $3 billion, sorry, in terms of our total trade with Mexico. Mexico was number one in 2019 and 2020. In 2021, Canada became number two, and China is number third in terms of is number three in terms of the U.S. trade partner. But one of the things that is very important to understand and to see what color is that? The kind of reddish part of the columns is our imports from those countries, and you can see the trade relationship between Canada, Mexico, and the United States is a lot more balanced than the U.S. relationship with China. And the number of exports, which is the brown area, U.S. exports, in the case of China, is significantly lower than it is in the case of Canada and in Mexico. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit in the next slides. Next one, please. So again, our bilateral relationships accounts for $661 billion. And this is the key part. It is part of a global supply chains that is specialized in electrical and industrial machinery sectors. And the trade flow between our countries has grown steadily for the past few years. Last year, it grew by 23%, but of course, it has to do, of course, with what happened in 2020, where the level of growth and the trade was impacted, not only in terms of the U.S.-Mexico trade, but all over the world for all countries in the world. The size of this trade relationship is, again, one of the largest in the world. To put it into context, Mexico and the U.S. trade over $1 million in product every single minute, just to put it into perspective how big this is for our countries. The next one, please. And the key of that relationship is that it's a very sophisticated trade relationship, because it is not only how much we trade, it's what we trade with each other. What is the nature of our trade economic relationship? And this is a supply chain. This is a manufacturing partnership. If you look at what the U.S. exports to Mexico, and you see, vehicle parts, semiconductors, petroleum, coal products, oil and gas, computer equipment, but you see imports from Mexico, motor vehicle parts, computer equipment, electrical equipment. You see a lot of equipment there. That means basically that this is a supply chain, and this is manufacturing. Yes, there's a lot of avocados and tequila, and yeah, we buy peaches and blueberries and peanuts from Georgia. Yes, but that's not really what it is about. It's about manufacturing. If we look at this also in terms of the Canada-U.S. relationship, you would see something very similar to that. Of course, we do deal with a lot of agricultural and commodities, but it's mostly manufacturing. And we have a very sophisticated manufacturing relationship that takes place in North America. Next one, please. And these are some of the countries that Mexico has free trade agreements with, like I was talking about a little while ago. Those are 48 countries that any company that is established in Mexico and manufacturing in Mexico has privileged access to those economies through our free trade agreements. That means more than 1.3 billion consumers in the world, which is 60% of the world's GDP, have preferential access for products manufactured in Mexico. The next one, please. Of course, like I was saying, the nature of our trade has evolved through the years. It started with NAFTA in the early 90s. And in 2020, that's where you see this line there. That's when we created a new agreement, which is the USMCA. The key about this graph is that you can see the growth. It's a steady growth of trade that has been going on for the past over 25 years, over 30 years, sorry, around 30 years. And that has to do with the development of this very crucial and very sophisticated relationship that I'm talking to you about. The next one, please. And like I was saying, in 2020, as all you probably most of you know, we transitioned from NAFTA into the new trade agreement, which is called the USMCA. Sorry, and the USMCA is it builds upon NAFTA, and it seeks to expand our trade and our investment in North America, and mostly, and the most very important, to increase our regional competitiveness. We know and we feel that we are part of a very competitive manufacturing region here in North America, and USMCA puts us in a better position to be more competitive with other regions in the world. It supports mutually beneficial trade, leading to more accessible markets, fair trade, and very robust economic growth in North America. And one of the added things about USMCA, of course, USMCA is a 21st century trade agreement, unlike NAFTA. NAFTA was done in the early 90s. The world is different in many ways, and includes groundbreaking provisions that we didn't have available in NAFTA, fostering digital trade liberalization, increases provisions on the agricultural trade, supports small and medium-sized businesses, improve worker conditions in North America, strengthening environmental regulations, and ensure how we work together to make sure that this agreement is enforceable, and we monitor how it's being operated, and to make sure that it is respected by all three countries. The next one, please. These are, I'm not going to go into details, but these are some of the key provisions that are very present in the USMCA. It addresses specific issues in there. Negotiating a free trade agreement is a very ambitious thing. It involves, as you can see, a wide range of issues, from customs regulations, government regulations, environment, agricultural, intellectual property, digital economy, all sorts of things. And these are some of the key provisions that we negotiated in the past few years to put into the new USMCA. The next one, please. And in this, these are all the chapters that are included in the free trade agreement, in the USMCA. All those ones that are in green in the graph are new chapters, are chapters that we did not have before. So this is what I mean when we say that our new agreement is a 21st century agreement. It's not saying that we thought that NAFTA was a horrible thing that some politicians say around in North America. We don't think it's a terrible thing. I think we think it was great for all three countries, and it has created thousands and thousands of jobs. But we needed to update this. We needed to, improve it, and for it to respond to the new global economy and to the new realities in terms of the global supply chains that are very present today, that were not so present in the early 90s when we did NAFTA. The next one, please. And in the first year, so USMCA has been in force since 2020. Only during the first year of the USMCA, our countries, the US and Mexico, traded over $614 billion. So there's no effect in terms of a change, a negative change in our trade relationships since we have the new trade agreement, but mostly the opposite. The trend is there, the trend is not changing, and not even COVID or the pandemic that impacted severely manufacturing and the operation of a lot of the manufacturing in the world impacted the growth and the relationship that we have built in North America. Next one, please. Which I think is basically the end of the presentation. We try to do, very quickly around it to give you a very 10,000 feet height view of our relationship. And again, what we would characterize it is as a very sophisticated, very important, but also very, very competitive trade relationship connected around manufacturing. We are partners, we are trading partners, but mostly we are manufacturing partners. And we have built in North America what we feel that is the most competitive manufacturing hub in the world. We are not about, creating a deeper integration like the European model is. We are mostly about building the basis for a heavily competitive world, particularly now in this new world and these new conditions of uncertainty about global supply chains. This situation, how strong we are regionally here in North America, puts us in a very, very competitive region towards other countries in the world. And we are very, very happy to be part of that. So I'll stop there. I hope I'm not too much over my time. And I'm, of course, available for your comments or any comments. Thank you.
Well, Consul Diaz, thank you for this very interesting presentation. Joining us now is Dr. Paul Liu, economics professor in the Coles College of Business here at Kennesaw State. He has published articles about free trade agreements and international manufacturing. Welcome, Dr. Liu. I guess to kick off this conversation, my first question to you, Consul Diaz, is you said a moment ago that the COVID pandemic did not have a negative impact on the USMCA. I guess I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. As you know, here in the United States, a lot of companies had to shut down for a period when a lot of their workers became infected with COVID-19. Did a lot of factories have to shut down temporarily in Mexico during the pandemic?
Well, that happened all over the world, of course. And yes, manufacturing had hiccups. So in terms of the size of our trade in 2020, there was a little bit of hiccup in 2020, like happened all over the world. But if you see the numbers in terms of how much, like I was saying, if I remember right, our total trade in 21 in comparison to 20 grew by an amazing, enormous amount of over 20% in a year, which is of course not normal. But it basically means, the bouncing back. And we bounced back. We have bounced back to pre-COVID conditions. So there was a hiccup, temporary hiccup, but manufacturing is very much there, and a lot of the consequences of COVID that we're still suffering, like everybody knows, everybody talks about the supply chain disruption that's going on around the world. It has had, of course, also some effects in our region, in the sense of people thinking about concepts like nearshoring or ally shoring, which is something that we might want to talk about. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Liu, I know you have a couple questions you'd like to ask Mr. Diaz. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Consul Diaz, for the very nice presentation. So my first question is let's say, just a moment. Yeah, I want to, connect China with Mexico. To what extent do you think Mexico may be able to replace China as a global manufacturing hub? Yeah, that's my first question.
Well, it's, of course, the size of the Chinese economy is enormous, of course. Mm-hmm. So even though the size of Mexican relationship with the United States is larger than the US-China trade relationship, and the nature of the relationship is, like I tried to explain, different. Mm-hmm. Replacing China in terms of being a manufacturer, a world manufacturer, a supplier of world manufacturing, would be something that Mexico would not be in a position to do in the short term, basically because of demographic and basically capabilities. In terms of as a supplier of the United States, of several parts, or being a part of the supply chain. And in terms of that, I would argue that we're already there. The tendency, of course, because of what's going on around the world, not only because of COVID, but all other uncertainties related to political and geostrategic and geopolitical issues going on around the world, there is a heavy push towards nearshoring, towards bringing your suppliers and your manufacturing closer to home, with countries that are closer, not only geographically, but also closer politically and strategically. And we feel very strongly to say that the United States does not have any stronger allies in that sense than Canada and Mexico.
I see. Yeah,
Go ahead, Dr. Liu.
Yeah, my second question is related to some new terms you mentioned in your presentation. For example, the new USMCA includes some new terms on anti-corruption. I do have a paper on how like free trade agreement can help members to consolidate their fledgling democracies. We know Mexico has a long history of democracy, so it's no longer a fledgling one. But nevertheless, it's still not as established as the US or European country, right? Because as I know, the first 70 years was mostly under the control of one party, right? Probably until around 2000. So the idea of the paper is, so without a free trade agreement, the incumbent politicians tend to protect domestic interest groups from foreign competition through trade barriers.
Mm-hmm.
So NAFTA or USMCA can serve as a commitment device, can help to bind the hand of government to reduce political rent and hence reduce the likelihood of coups or takeovers. So that's the basic idea of my research. So I want to know whether you have any observation or you have anything to share, for example, some life stories or with some finer details to support this argument.
You're dead on point, Professor. Free trade agreements are transformational. And it happened with Mexico. I mean, Mexico started in the mid 80s, opening up its economy. And then, of course, we started in the 90s with NAFTA, which was our first large free trade agreement. But like I said, we've done several after that. And opening your economy and doing free trade agreements with democracies, with the leading democracies in the world, like the United States, like Canada, like the European Union, involves many things. And among other, it involves the need and the obligation to be transparent. Because, of course, for those countries to make sure and to have the certainty that the level field is straight, that there are not some unfair access to local producers or local suppliers. And among other things, that involves in our free trade agreement, specifically Article 27 of the USMCA has several provisions that include measures to identify and combat and commitments by all three countries, by the way, not only Mexico, to fight against any sort of corruption or any sort of illegal privileges to take advantage of the preferred access that the treaty entails. By the way, we have very similar conditions in our agreement with the European Union, by the way. So doing these free trade agreements is, like I said at the beginning of this answer, is very transformational. It has transformed not only our trade relationship with the world, it has transformed the nature of the Mexican state and the Mexican institutions, because we are open to the world.
Dr. Liu, I have a question for you. Based on your analysis of free trade agreements, do you believe that the USMCA is a worthy successor to NAFTA?
So your question is whether it's better or worse,
Yes,
right?
yes.
I see.
Better.
So we know the USMCA was initiated by the Trump administration, right? So it's supposed to deliver better terms for the US based on what he said. in Trump's word, as also Consul Diaz also mentions, yeah, Trump does not like the NAFTA, and he considered NAFTA the worst trade deal ever made, but a lot of people disagree. And he believed the USMCA offer better term for the US. However, trade can be mutually beneficial, right? And it's indeed the basis for free trade. So the gains to the US does not necessarily imply better term for Mexico. Although based on the graph, the last slide, Consul Diaz shows the US export to Mexico indeed grew a little faster compared to import from Mexico, but the Mexican export to the US still stay very high. So from his presentation, we learn a lot about specific details, policies under the new MCA, and NAFTA as a predecessor benefited tremendously many people, including US consumers and Mexican maquiladora plants along the US Mexican border. Just in case some of you may not be familiar with maquiladora, they are mainly the assembly plant, get a part from all over the world and then assemble the cars and then ship usually back to the US. Okay, they benefit a lot from NAFTA, but NAFTA failed to deliver the same result to other regions in Mexico. So with the vision to develop intra-regional production network, I mean, among the different regions in Mexico, I hope the USMCA will produce even a better result.
Okay, we have our first question from one of our audience members. Lorena has asked a question. Has the USMCA agreement in any way impacted the tourism industry between the United States and Mexico? Consul General, what is your answer to that?
The size of the tourism presence relationship between the US and Mexico is enormous. Again, also millions, if I remember right, I think around 6 million Americans visit Mexico every year. By far the largest of any country in the world. Americans don't visit any country more than they visit Mexico. Now, this has blossomed, and it has blossomed heavily for many reasons, but of course it is, I think it's not one of the chapters included in the USMCA. There's no provision in the treaty, whether in NAFTA or the new treaty, on tourism itself. It's not part of a free trade agreement. However, it does impact many ways because, of course, a free trade agreement or economic relationship creates an open economy that is more friendly for investment. So that means a larger investment on tourism infrastructure in Mexico, a heavy presence of, hotel chains and flights and all those things that need to be available for this trade tourism relation to be there. So my argument would be yes, indirectly, and also because of the heavy relationship that it has created between people in my country and the United States. Before NAFTA, we were kind of close to each other. We didn't talk to each other a lot. We didn't have this everyday connection that happens. And, thousands and thousands of people travel between our countries every day, not necessarily for tourism, but for business purposes. But business purposes or conventions and things like that have an impact on tourism. So it is connected to that.
Sure. Professor Liu, in your research, have free trade agreements often had the side effect of benefiting either tourism directly or, as Mr. Diaz just said, the infrastructure for tourism?
Yeah, I haven't done much research on tourism industry. I believe, Consul Diaz can say more about that. I can only talk a little bit about my personal experience. And I have visited Mexico a few times, mostly as a tourist. The more recent one is Tijuana near the end of 2019. That's before USMCA become effective. It took me only about half an hour to get to the city by shuttle from San Diego downtown. Pretty efficient. And in the city, we see a lot of cabs, and of course the infrastructure not as good as in the US, but pretty in good conditions overall. I feel pleasant. visit the famous Caesar restaurant, and the place where the famous Caesar salad was first invented. Consul, Diaz, and anyone in the audience can help me to verify if this is true or not. Across border, I saw many cars, people, cargoes. As an economist, I saw not only traffic, but also opportunities. People and the goods across border because of opportunities on other side, right, of the border. And so any difference in wage and the price, resource endowment will drive free trade movement of people. So both similarities and differences between the two countries can help to strengthen the bilateral relations.
Right. Speaking of wages, Jenny, who is watching us right now, has a question for both of you. One of your slides, Consul General, briefly mentioned that 40 to 50% of workers are earning $14 to $16 per hour. Do you think that wages will increase in coming years?
Well, one of the provisions, the new provisions in the USMCA is related to wages, specifically in the car industry, which was part of the negotiation that took place between our three countries to make sure that there wasn't any kind of an unfair advantage related to low wages. So what happened is that a provision was included in the USMCA that stipulates that at least 40% of the content of the cars that are considered that receive the origin denomination privilege of North America has to be produced with wages that are of that standard, of that level that you just mentioned, which is a big change towards what we had in NAFTA. NAFTA didn't have any provision like that, and that is part of a process. It's part of what Mexico will work on within the next few years, because it's, of course, it's stipulated in a way that it's put into place in time for Mexico to do the necessary change for that. But to be clear about this, it's very important to be clear that no country in the world, and I would probably include China in this, and no country in the world seeks to be a player in international global trade and in manufacturing based on low wages. Mm-hmm. That is not the way to go. Mm-hmm. The way to go is to be efficient and to be and to be competitive, not based on wages, but based on efficiency, on access to supplies, on having highly qualified personnel and all that. And Mexico has all of that. And however, we do still have, of course, very strong challenges. Professor Liu was very right about talking about the disparities that still exist in Mexico. But basically, the story has been that we have a very engaged and connected, globally connected manufacturing part of Mexico, which mostly from the center to the north. Center and northern Mexico is heavily connected. Some parts of that part of the Mexico of the country are heavily industrialized, and the southern part of Mexico is lagging behind, with higher levels of poverty, with not so many manufacturing and global manufacturing and connection to supply chains, and that is a problem. And that's one of the challenges that the Mexican government is addressing and needs to address in the next 3 years.
Right. Professor Liu, let me follow up. I'm not as familiar with free trade agreements as you are, obviously. Are requirements in these agreements about increased wages, is that a normal part of the negotiations between countries or regions?
Yeah, that's a good question. And also I 100% agree with Consul Diaz just said. The conventional wisdom is the foreign firms, they choose free wage, which is true, right? Choose the lower cost, nothing wrong with that. However, wage is not really a deal breaker. Actually, I did research many years ago using data from China, intra-regional data in China. What we find is very interesting. We find the province with a higher wage actually attract more FDI from Western economies. So it does not mean they don't care about the high wage. Of course they care. And the reason is the province with higher wage usually come with better policy, better infrastructure, and all of this matter. They look at the package as a bundle. That's why I'm not particularly worried about the higher minimum wage requirement under new USMCA, as long as Mexico can come up with a plan to increase, build a better road and the port, and increase the quality of the business environment, and they're still very likely for Mexico to achieve the goal through the agreement.
Okay.
So that's why I'm not worried too much about the higher wage.
Okay. We have another question from a viewer. Callie wants to know about technological changes in manufacturing. She's wondering about the impact a robotics revolution could have on employment and the growth of manufacturing in Mexico, especially how it might impact wages. Do you have any thoughts on that, Consul General?
Well, actually, I mean, the impact of technology on manufacturing is one of the issues that when a lot of people in Mexico and here in the United States sometimes blame NAFTA or blame global trade because of the loss of jobs. You know, a lot of the conversation that we heard in the past, again, both in my country and here, sometimes is by certain industries that because of free trade or because of these treaties have decided to move elsewhere. And for example, I mean, here in the South, a lot of people talk about the loss of the textile industry, you know, that they lost the textile industry because of China or because of Mexico, and it was because of NAFTA. The real answer is no, those jobs were lost because of technological improvements to the production. Most of those jobs are not there anymore, and industries were transformed because a lot of those industries have been, changed the labor from manual labor to technological labor. So the world is different, and a lot of those industries changed and moved elsewhere because of that, not because of that. So many of those, the reason why a lot of that happened has to do with technological advancement. The other thing, of course, is that if you want to be a player and want to be a competitor in terms of attracting foreign investment and having those plants in your country, of course, you need to have the provisions in a free trade like this, or to have, you know, the supply, the machinery, like we saw in the graphs, to come from one place to another, but also, of course, to have the suppliers, the tier 2s and the tier 3s companies that supply and support those plants at all the technological levels. So it's a very, like I was saying, it's a very complex issue establishing this supply chain relationship, and it goes way, way far more than just cheaper labor.
Here's a question for you, Dr. Liu, from Callie as well. She wants to know your thoughts on some manufacturing jobs that are returned from China, but with robots still leading the return of other jobs. I'm not quite sure if I'm interpreting Callie's question correctly, but what are your thoughts about, you know, robots versus human beings in these factories? As the Consul General just said, you know, technology naturally advances and how you manufacture a product naturally changes.
I see. Yeah, that's an interesting question. First of all, the threat from machine has been happening in over centuries, okay, and a long time ago. And initially, we learned about the Luddite movement in UK, British, you know, when the textile machine was first introduced, the workers, they hated the machine, they destroyed the machine, and later on they were sent as a criminal to Australia or North America, okay, by British as a punishment. Now this is happening again in many countries, including the US, California, the port worker, they hated the crane machine because they are so good, so efficient. And it's true, I mean, the machine are replacing jobs, okay, everywhere. And in the US, we see the same thing, right? The banker market branch, they lay off some cashier because they buy the ATM machine. And in the library, they got a new scanning machine. Now they don't have to hire so many librarians, right? It's happening everywhere. But we cannot blame, that's just a trend, okay? We cannot turn against the tide. There's nothing we can really do about it. Over long term, we do not really see the drop in wage, right? Living standard. We see the opposite. I don't think this will cause any major issue. People will adjust, okay? And we will adjust. And if the machine can do a lot of more new jobs and the hard work, and it can release us, right? From the hard work, we can do something else. At least we can have a meeting, entertain each other, right? I don't think that's something we should worry about. But I mean, nevertheless, and we have to prepare to make sure we can find a job, right? We can try to avoid the tasks which can handle easily by the machine. And that's why you have to go to college, right? Get a degree and learn something more sophisticated, right? So you are not going to be easily replaced by a robot.
Right, right. We have another question. Consul General, what do you think are the most promising areas for bilateral cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico?
There's all sorts of collaboration going on. It depends on whether we're talking about specifically in the terms of the economic relationship,
Yes,
but of course, if you mean within the economic relationship in terms of trade and investment, it's all that. Of course, I would probably direct you to look some of the what I was talking about before in terms of the new areas that are involved, that are included in the USMCA. Issues like digital trade, issues like environmental work, trade, investment on non-traditional energy sectors. Those are, very, very active and very, very, very competitive. Of course, I mean, our relationship at this point, like I was saying also, is driven heavily by manufacturing, and the two leaders are manufacturing of cars and aerospace, which is also very, very strong. And there's no signs of this changing, and actually there's no signs of this shrinking at all, but all to the contrary, because of factors like I mentioned before, the phenomenon related to nearshoring. We don't see that changing in the future. So the strength of those industries, in our perspective, is going to keep growing for a while.
Are there any outstanding obstacles that, with regard to trade, that the USMCA, in your opinion, did not address well enough?
We always think that some of the challenges have to do with making sure that what we agree on in terms of a free trade agreement is in place and we are able to enforce it. Some of our challenges are also a lot of what is viewed in terms of trade diplomacy as non-tariff barriers, which is a phenomenon all over the world. It happens in every single region and in between every single country. And we have non-tariff barriers that exist for Mexican products to enter the United States and vice versa. It has to do with regulations. It has to do with other environmental or other sorts of things of regulations that are not tariffs, but make trade difficult. And that is something that we always need to be working on. And we feel that we could be stronger on that area.
Since you both have said that, the USMCA is a stronger trade agreement than NAFTA was, looking to the future, maybe over the next decade or so, how do you think US-Mexico relations will continue to evolve? Consul General.
Like I said, I mean, we don't have any question about how we know, and we not only we feel, we know that we are linked by the hip, basically. Mm-hmm. We are connected. Our economies are deeply connected. Millions of jobs in the US, in Mexico, and in Canada rely on trade and this sophisticated relationship. So that's not changing. That will not change. So the future is towards how we organize better, how we work together better to take care of this relationship. The US-Mexico relationship is one of the most sophisticated in the world. not only because of the trade and economic, I already talked a lot about that, but any issue that exists in foreign policy is an issue that exists in bilateral relationships between the US and Mexico, whether it's environment, whether it's security, of course, whether it's any other issue, health issues. You think of any issue and there's an issue and there's a conversation going on between US officials and Mexican officials on those matters. We are partners. We share millions of families. There's over 1 million American citizens who live in Mexico. 1 of every 10 people who live in the United States, 1 of every 10 in the United States is either Mexican or the child of a Mexican. So this is not changing. We are connected by a tremendously strong economic connection, but also demographics, by people, by history, by culture, and by basically we're neighbors and we share a part of the world, and that's not going to change, of course.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said that we are connected by the hip. I think that's a great analogy. Professor Liu, do you agree with that, that both Mexico and the United States are connected by the hip, at least when it comes to manufacturing?
Yeah, I agree. I think the 2 countries we're getting closer and closer. Yeah, there are some natural advantages because the 2 countries are so close together, right? And this will lead to like the nearshoring, as Consul Diaz also mentioned, right? More and more manufacturer plant will be built across the border in both countries. And also the population, if you look at the demographic, as also Consul Diaz report, and the Mexican labor is much younger. The median age is only 28, right? 28. But in the US is 38. And so there's a lot of complementarities between the 2 countries. If we look at external factors, I think it's also in favor of Mexico. Again, we talk about China, and Mexico may benefit from like US-China trade wars, also the COVID-19 pandemic in the long run. Of course, every country get hurt by the pandemic, but in the long run, when US firm are trying to diversify the global value chain away from China, and Mexico become a natural choice. I think altogether, I do think the 2 countries will be able to build a better trading relationship.
We only have time for just one more question. Consular General Diaz, I'm kind of curious. We hear, every day now in the United States, we hear news about the tight global supply chain, partly due to COVID, or now with the Ukraine-Russian war, that could also hamper supply chain efforts. As you communicate with your government every day and with your friends and family back in Mexico, are there similar discussions going on about this global supply chain and how it's affecting the ability of goods to come to market or the ability of raw materials to come into Mexico?
Oh, certainly, of course. I mean, like I mentioned before, the Mexican economy is very, very open. And of course, we are heavily connected in North America, but we are all over the world with important trade relationships with 48 countries in the world in terms of free trade. So this disruption has a heavy impact, of course, and it creates a lot of challenges for manufacturers in Mexico to be able to obtain and to secure the necessary parts and supplies that they need in order for that manufacturing to take place. A large part, an important part of those parts come from the other side of the ocean, from China. And so of course, yeah, I mean, it is an impact on that. However, of course, there is a strong concern and a strong push to look at how we can substitute as much as we can from suppliers that come with uncertainty towards creating more certainty in our manufacturing activity.
Okay, great. Well, everyone, this is all the time we have for today's Consular Connections discussion. I thought this was an outstanding conversation, and I certainly learned a lot from both Consul General Diaz and Professor Liu. Thank you, Consul General, for joining us today. It really means a lot. For that, Dr. Paul Liu, thank you as well. Your expertise was appreciated. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Lola.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Our moderator, Dr. Azriel, always does a phenomenal job. This is our third Consular Connections event, and I think you did phenomenally again. Dr. Liu, thank you so much for being our faculty panelists. We really enjoyed your comments. And of course, thank you so much, Consul General Diaz, for being our guest speaker and doing a phenomenal presentation on U.S.-Mexico relations, on trade and economic relations. And so I have launched a survey. Please, if you do not mind, please respond to that survey. It really helps us in terms of planning our future sessions. Also, I want to mention that we're going to go on a quick intermission, and we typically have a student seminar where it's a little bit more informal. The questions you were asking us in the chat, you have the opportunity to actually engage with the Consul General, ask him these questions directly, and introduce yourself to the Consul General. It's typically for students, but because we've decided this is our last session, everyone who's joined today is welcome to join our next session. And so that will start, you can use the same exact link, or you can just stay and hang tight, but that will begin promptly at 12:15. So right at 12, just in 3 minutes, we'll take a quick intermission and join again at 12:15 for that more informal discussion and talk with the Consul General. But thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers. We greatly appreciate you, and thank you to you all for joining as well. Please respond to the survey and let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.